Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Gail, congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to start kind of as a table-setting moment. You know, you've been in Washington a long time. A lot of us got to know you back in 2012 when you were working at the FTC as an attorney advisor to Commissioner Julie Brill. And if we remember that moment, it was one in which the FTC, in a lot of our minds, whiffed on being able to investigate Google. And now, nearly over a decade later, you just got 78 votes in the Senate. What's changed?
Gosh, events, dear. Events happened. Isn't that what they say in situations like this? So back in 2012, I think there were a couple of things going on. These are newer, more nascent markets back then, and people didn't really understand them the way that many people do today. I'd also add that that applied to the agency, right, as well as the outside world more broadly. And also in 2012, the definition of like market power is, can you control prices for an extended period of time? And the thinking around tech platforms at that time was, competition's just a click away. Entry barriers are low. There's always some cool new technology being cooked up in a garage somewhere, and that technology will leapfrog whatever exists today. And that was very much the mindset at the antitrust agencies. And I know, because I was there. And then fast forward to, thank you very much for reminding me that I got 78 votes in the Senate.
Sweated over everyone, I'm sure.
My deputies are starting to tease me about this because I say it way too much, but I'll get over it. I will get over it. I just have to repeat it every day right now. So fast forward to today, and we're seeing this like really interesting awakening on the left, but also importantly on the right, around technology platforms, but also like concentration throughout the economy in general. And so, I go look at my Senate hearing, and there were a lot of tough questions from the right about the levels of concentration throughout the economy. Josh Hawley hopefully turned up with some charts where he like demonstrated that, and we had a colloquy around it. And so it's now a bipartisan issue, and there's a consensus around the need for robust antitrust enforcement, and that's obviously like backed up by the president's announcement when he nominated me in December last year. He did call out big tech, but he also called for robust antitrust enforcement with clear rules of the road. And so like that's where we are in 2025.
So if we can dig into that a little bit, and we heard Chairman Ferguson reference this phrase, MAGA Antitrust. Mm-hmm. So what is that in your mind? How are you thinking about that?
Excuse me. We can call it MAGA Antitrust. We could call it America First Antitrust. I also am quite partial to Hillbilly Antitrust. I may have to try and work that more into the mainstream.
J.D. Vance's next book.
There you go. Look, it's about putting American citizens as consumers, as workers. We can define it how we want, giving them a seat at the table alongside other important stakeholders in the antitrust enterprise. Obviously we have practitioners, we have companies, and they need legal certainty. But we in the America First movement are about giving American citizens a seat at the table on any number of policy issues. Right now the hot button issue is trade. I just came from another event up the street, and I reminded folks that quite recently, we had a Treasury Secretary who took to cable news, I think it was one of the Sunday shows, and he was asked about, tariffs and where he stood on tariff policy, and he kind of made the same point I just made around the need to give Americans a seat at the table with regards to economic policy, and he said something like, we can do better than let them eat flat screen TVs. And so that's where we're coming from too.
So we're obviously here at the Little Tech Conference, and I'm hoping you can speak a little bit to, how are you different from the previous administration when it comes to enforcement, and what does that mean specifically for startups?
Okay, so we've already talked about there's a through line from the first Trump term through the Biden administration. Many of the cases we're carrying forward were investigations open in the first Trump term. So we're standing behind the robust antitrust enforcement that's been in place for 8 years. But there are some differences. I mean, one thing I flagged for an example for startups in the room, if you're interested in this, is I'm more open to consent decrees and merger cases. And I went into that in some detail at the hearing. Jonathan Cantor was not a proponent of that. But I also, at the other event I just came from, said to use very technical language that only antitrust lawyers will understand. That doesn't mean we're in the business of accepting what I call bullshit consent decrees. And so that's an important difference, I think, from the previous administration.
I think that's a very important technical term.
It is, yes.
Bullshit consent decrees. There's a lot of discussion now, particularly in the big tech space, about the importance of national champions and how important they are to national security, and because of that, they should receive certain treatment from the federal government. How do you think about that as an antitrust enforcer?
Thank you for the question. This is really important because it's something that we're seeing popping up in many different contexts, but also in the antitrust realm. So to steel man what some technology companies are saying, we've got these global technological races against certain adversaries. So when I was at the White House, I did a lot of work around 5G deployment, right? So that's one technology race. The current technology race is AI, right? And so we're hearing certain platform companies, but tech companies beyond the platform companies talk about the ways in which they need the United States government to support them because they are de facto quasi-national champions. And so China has national champions, we need national champions. And that comes into the antitrust space as a sort of like a defense. It's not a defense known to the antitrust laws, but it's an argument and a defense being made. And so, the argument is we're really, really important to national security, therefore you should not be applying the antitrust laws to us at this moment in time. And you kind of push it out to its logical extension. It's almost like an argument for a de facto exemption from the antitrust laws, which, as anybody in the room who's worked in Congress will know, is like really, really hard to get. But they're kind of asking for it from the antitrust agencies. So that's their steel man. And then how I think about it is, we're free market Republicans. Like we want free markets to thrive, and a very important component in that is healthy competition, right? We don't want an economy of monopolies and oligopolies, right? We want startups to thrive, to be able to enter these markets, to compete with bigger companies. And antitrust is a really important backstop on that whole construct, right? Which is as American as apple pie. And so I'm here to say that antitrust enforcement is really important to keeping our markets free and open and competitive. And we have historic precedent that we can do both things. We can both defend our national security and we can enforce the antitrust laws. And so during the Second World War, we continued enforcing the antitrust laws. And we had, considerable foes then. Another example that I've learned from the antitrust division is the case of AT&T in the 1980s. AT&T made an argument that if they were broken up, that would undermine national security because we needed them, AT&T, to stay as a monopoly to fight the Cold War effectively. The Justice Department moved forward, they broke up AT&T, and then guess what happened? A lot of innovation was unleashed, a lot of competition was unleashed. We got the wireless industry from that breakup, right? We won that technological race because of the breakup, some might say. The first internet modem was released from Ma Bell. It had been sort of under wraps for a long time because AT&T did not have the incentives to release the modem onto the market because they knew it would undermine their franchise. So that's what I'm here to say about that argument as an antitrust enforcer.
One of the entry points for the right in this antitrust enforcement conversation has been the issue of speech. Mm-hmm. I think it's what woke a lot of the right up to looking at competition policy, and in particular, it wasn't just the throttling of speech that people saw at a mass scale, but also how competitors to those tech platforms suffered under what was perceived to be an ideological agenda. I'm thinking of the case of Parler in particular. So when we look at speech and from where you sit as an enforcer, how do you view the two? Is there a role for competition policy when it comes to addressing speech issues?
So I'm 3 weeks into the job, okay, with that caveat. I was asked about this at the hearing too, also not surprisingly by conservative senators. And it's something that has not really been talked about much over the past 4 or 5 years, let's say. It's an animating concern, however, for many, many Republican senators, particularly those on the Judiciary Committee who think about these things. And so Ted Cruz asked me about this, Senator Lee asked me about this, Josh Hawley on down the dais. It's clearly a concern for them. The answer I gave to Ted Cruz was, without having like a file open in front of me, without having an investigative team around me, is, as a theoretical matter, when you have a news story in circulation that is not politically popular, and you have one platform that circulates 50% of news stories, or 50% of Americans obtain their news from, it's not that hard to make that story disappear from the internet. I mean, it's sort of an obvious statement to make. I think it shocked some people that I said that. But, think about it. We have large platforms. They have disappeared stories. And I can see where those senators are coming from. I'll just leave it at that.
Some VCs and founders have expressed concern that the previous administration's approach to enforcement limited M&A opportunities. And you saw Chairman Ferguson, I think, comment on this a little bit.
Yeah.
How will your approach to merger review balance competitive concerns and the innovative economy?
Okay. So I'll echo what he said. We are here to do tough law enforcement when it's appropriate. If it's not, we're going to get out of the way. And I think the other distinction that I drew is we're also going to be open to robust consent decrees. Again, not here for the bullshit consent decrees. And so those are the ways in which I'm thinking about deals coming in the door.
I want to go back to this idea of MAGA antitrust and what it could mean. There's been a lot of discussion of the role economic analysis plays in enforcement versus the sort of legal enforcement review. A lot of this dealing with Matt Stoller's least favorite people in the world, and that's economists. So how do you think about that balance? Because on the right, we tend to appreciate more economic review, what the economists have to say, versus, I think a little bit more of the enforcement heavy side. How are you viewing that?
Yeah, so I'm supportive of bringing economists in and giving them a seat at the table in cases. We're going to have a deputy for economics, which was a crowd pleaser with our in-house economists. He'll be starting in a month or so. He's already been announced. Someone I worked with at the Federal Trade Commission years ago. He's a very seasoned PhD economist and a practitioner. I will also add he's very pro-enforcement when appropriate. Not all PhD economists are. And so they're quite involved in our investigations. Even if we didn't want to include economists in the analysis, there is an expectation if we go to court, the other side will have an economist. They'll have a testifying expert. We are expected to have a testifying expert. That's just kind of how it works. If only because they serve to cancel one another out, and then the judge goes and defaults to the documents and the legal arguments being made and can craft an opinion around that. So that's how I see the role of economists. I will say I'm not kind of here for economists who are ideologically opposed to antitrust enforcement, and that was part of the personnel pick that we made. Those economists do exist. They exist at the agencies as well as in the outside world. And the phrase that I like to rely on there is the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And sometimes economists tend to over-index on the former. to say there's no case there. Nothing to see. Move along. Big is beautiful.
When we're looking at some of the innovators and the founders here in the audience today, how should the smaller tech companies approach DOJ if they feel like they're experiencing anti-competitive conduct from dominant players in their marketplace? Do you have practical advice for little tech that may not have the resources that the big companies do to try and maintain a level playing field? Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for them?
Well, you have quite the convening platform here. I mean, congratulations. And I should have started with that to Y Combinator for bringing everybody into the room. I'm also told there were 35,000 people live streaming this event. Hello, everyone. I had no idea it was so interesting.
I told Luther not to tell us that.
Oh, okay. So, please assume that I am very, very interested in your viewpoint. I am a firm believer in competitive markets. I'm a firm believer in antitrust enforcement to keep those markets open and competitive so that you all can succeed. You all, to me, are the future of the economy. You're the future of innovation. And so I'm here for you. There are other ways you can navigate DC. You don't have to go straight to the top. You do have allies here on the right and the left, an increasing number on the right. And that's been an interesting development that Rachel and I have seen over the past several years. So that would be my advice.
So to the extent that you can answer this question, we've been talking about the tech space, but there's obviously a lot more in the competitive landscape. Concentration is across the economy. We've heard references to it in the health sector. Your hearing, I think, brought up some in the ag sector. Yeah. How are you looking at it generally, to the extent that you can talk about it outside of the tech space?
Okay. So this goes back to definitionally, what does America First Antitrust mean? So it's, consumers are not just limited to one sector of the economy, it's across the board. And so we're very interested in cost of living. It's really important. The one executive order, I think it's actually a presidential memorandum that we're directly responding to, is a memorandum that came out about the cost of living. And so we're, assume we're looking at consumer-facing markets. That's a really important piece of it. And then, we are going to be open to, outside counsel. Please come visit with us. Tell us about what you're seeing. We don't assume to have perfect knowledge about what's going on in markets. But consumer facing is going to be really important. And being a piece of bringing down the cost of living, it's not solely our charge. Obviously, there are other levers across the government that can be pulled, but antitrust and competition are really important to that.
So this might be a tricky question for you, but when this conference opened, the first session, Brody Mullins asked your predecessor, Jonathan Cantor, what was a mistake that you made? I'm going to ask you, what is one thing that the Biden administration did well in this space that you would want to repeat?
I think they brought immense political will to challenging some old assumptions about antitrust, the sort of like big is beautiful way of thinking and mode of thinking about antitrust. And I think that was a really important conversation. I will say, so, some of that did start under the Trump 45 administration, but they carried through on that. And, I think they built interesting coalitions. We're here today, so.
Do you still think that there is a place for bipartisan cooperation in this space? I would say yes, given that you have 78 votes, but how do you shepherd that forward?
Yeah, well, we can start by being responsive to the Hill. We can, be working in broader coalitions that exist, that have grown up in the past 5 years, and be responsive to arguments from the right and the left, assuming they're coming from like a good-hearted place. And a lot of those people know where to find me. They're already finding me.
I'm sure they are.
They are, yeah.
As we wrap up, I want you to address one other question that's been a totem of the right for a long time on the antitrust enforcement side, and that is the consumer welfare standard. You know, there's people that want to dump it over the edge, there's people that want to keep it, but how do you think about it as a long-time enforcer, but also practitioner in the antitrust space?
So, I mean, it's the law. It's been gradually baked into precedent since the late 1970s. What I've said, just coming from the previous event, is as a practitioner, the consumer welfare standard is, it's decently broad. I mean, the variables including, you know, quality, price as a dimension of competition, output, innovation, things of that nature. As a matter of agency practice, often it's been narrowed down to price because that is what can be measured. That can be put into an econometric model, and that has become often the game in agency practice. The other side has a econometric model, the agency produces one, or it kicks the tires on the other side's model. And so the narrow focus on price, I think, is something that is not even compatible with the consumer welfare construct as it exists in current precedent. And I think we need to be open, particularly in certain markets, to think about it more broadly than just price.
Last question for you. What was your favorite part of Senate confirmation?
Oh, gosh.
Please be forthcoming.
The vote.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to use this. Thank you for the question, Senator. No, I'm going to use this to give Senator Grassley a shout out. Senator Grassley was like a prairie populist when it came to antitrust, long before a lot of other people were.
In the ag sector, especially.
He's a very dear man. He's a gracious man. People give him a hard time because of his age, but boy, did he help me navigate that process. And then before the vote, took to the floor to deliver floor remarks in support of my nomination, which I didn't even know about. And so we connected. I know he likes me because he calls me Slater. and apparently, according to his staff, that's what he does with people that he likes. Oh. And so I learned a lot from him. I was greatly helped by his staff, and I really did appreciate the care that they take behind the scenes, which you well know, Rachel, is the hardest part of the job, because you've just sherped four HHS nominees through confirmation. So yeah, that's quite the lift.
Yes, my husband told me never to volunteer for anything again.
No, so here we are.
Anything you want to? Any parting words for your several thousand new best friends?
Oh yeah. Are they all my new best friends? I don't know. So just, I mean, to summarize, we've said a lot of this already, but look, we're here for giving American citizens a seat at the table when it comes to antitrust. We are here for robust antitrust enforcement. I'm not a regulator, I'm a law enforcer. And we see antitrust enforcement as a key backstop on free markets. So that's where we're coming from as Republicans. And I also think what I've just said taps into a tradition. John Sherman of the Sherman Act was a Republican from Ohio. And when he took to the floor of the Senate in support of his legislation in 1890, he made a really important point, which is the country was founded by a somewhat anti-monopoly movement. I mean, the Boston Tea Party was an act against a monopoly. The East India Tea Company, God bless them. This is part of a longer tradition. We are part of a longer tradition. And John Sherman said at the time in 1890, having reminded his fellow senators of that founding act, if we wouldn't stand for a king in our politics, which we didn't, we shouldn't stand for it in commerce and trade and the necessities of life. And so that's where we're coming from.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gail.
All right.